continue.
Well,
All right. Hey, good evening, Borge. So this is an unscripted, unoutlined discussion,
mm,
and honestly, I just wanted to make this happen because there's this question in my mind, bugging at me for days, and
yeah.
so yeah, basically, everyone keeps saying everything is political.
Mm.
Everything is political. Every single thing, even. And as political scientists, I mean, how does it sit with you? Because honestly,
It
I'm
is.
bothered.
It is.
Because,
It is
yeah, go ahead.
bothering. Even that question has been bugging me or scratching the
Mm,
back of my head for the past few weeks, especially with
mm,
since I'm teaching Paul Theo.
mm-hmm,
So I needed to set the borders of what political is, and my
mm-hmm,
students, I asked them, "What is the political?"
mm,
And I asked them, "Does anyone believe that everything is political?" And some people said, "Yes, everything is political," because that's
mm,
what they were taught. So I
mm-hmm,
said, "No, everything is
mm-hmm,
not political." And I think if we are going to start a conversation, I think we can lay a thesis, which is,
mm,
well, for my case, my thesis would be everything is not political. For the love of God, it's lazy thinking, and
ooh,
it is lazy thinking. But I'm gonna make allowance for our colleagues who would use it as a shorthand
uh-huh,
for their intense knowledge of what politics is. Everything is not political, but everything can be politicized.
mm-hmm,
So I think we can start with that. But
yeah,
for me, it rejects the existence of a private sphere, and that's my problem with it.
mm-hmm,
Even in Athens, even in direct democracy, the private sphere exists not because it's
mm-hmm,
sacred. Let me have a qualifying statement with that, but it exists.
mm.
So anyway, what about you? What are you? Ikaw ang malalim ang galit sa ano eh.
Gaga. I mean, honestly, actually, it's also what I've been taught. Like everything is political. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, that is also political. And I think what it really means, to be honest, and I to a certain extent agree, is that there are political consequences to your actions,
Mm,
and in many ways, in many parts of our lives, we are all affected by politics. Which, of course, if we put it that way, I agree.
mm,
And like almost everything is regulated, subject of law, and a
mm.
subject of legislation, regulation, rules, etc. The problem is that when I mean, a lot of people say, even like movies and art, that
But
thing,
yeah, I think that
art.
we can focus on that.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah, because like of course, especially right now, this artist, what's it, Tarantadong Kalbo. That's his
Tapos
name.
Tarantadong Kalbo. Si
Tarantadong
Tarantadong Kalbo.
Kalbo. Oh,
Okay,
tarantado talaga.
let's use his name.
Mm. No, because he says that all forms of art is political. That's, I forgot the exact quote, but that's what
Mm.
people have been resharing that quote actually. And while we do not deny that art is political, in fact, it can be
No, or
very
can be.
political. Or can
Can
be.
be.
Sorry,
Can be.
it can be. Yeah, it can be political, definitely. And his art in particular is all laudable and, yeah, appealing
Yep.
and a good form of art.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
that's not all of art.
Mm.
And or even like, actually, I think it's honest. Let me put it with all due respect to
Mm.
to those who educated us, is that we, like, I suppose it's their way of saying of saying that, oh, our lessons are important. It's like no matter what you do, you can't escape it. And uh I mean, honestly, it's to be honest, it's a trap. It feels like a trap,
But
because what it actually
yeah.
does is, no matter what you do, you'll
Mm.
always be subject of the political. And I think
It
people
is.
think that it's that's why I think activists want to
Uh,
put forward this idea, because
yeah.
it's either you're with the oppressor or you're with us.
Ayun na
That's
naman
the
yan. That's also
yeah,
another. It's part of the issue. It's this is basically a bundle really. That's why we're having a
yeah,
relatively unscripted thing right now,
yeah,
because it's something that we must untie, we must disentangle. So we have artists, our cultural forms necessarily political? Is everything
mm-hmm,
political? Should
right,
everything be politicized? So these are issues that. But regarding our teachers, then again, I can excuse them to an extent. According to John Dewey, one
mm-hmm,
must employ all means to spark someone's interest. So,
mm,
so if
yeah,
that is that, then fine, I can excuse them. But to simply assume it as a dictum
mm-hmm,
is a at least lazy thinking. At
Mm-hmm.
most, it is dangerous
Mm-hmm.
because not everything is political. And to
Mm-hmm.
politicize everything, this is basically what totalitarianism is, as far as Hannah Arendt is concerned.
Yeah, yeah. Totalitarian. Because I think that's the whole point where
Mm.
even your most private moments, it's also
Oh,
political.
hell no.
I, yeah, that's what they say, you know. I mean, it's. I think this was branched over from the very
Mm.
old essay, Carol. Her, that's the word. What's the? How did she? How's that
Yeah.
pronounced? The person's political. I'll double check that.
Yeah. Okay. While you're
Uh,
checking that one, I think. Yeah. While you're checking that one, we can. That
Hersich,
I will make a one qualifying statement.
Henish. Okay.
Everything is not political. Everything has a political dimension to an extent. I can accept that one.
Mm-hmm.
I can accept that one. But
Yeah.
the dimension need not be proximate with the object itself or with the core of
Right.
the essence of an object. Can be a
Mm.
dimension, can be a very small dimension, but
Right.
I hate the term everything is political because first it is an
Mm-hmm.
uncareful use of the word is.
Mm-hmm.
Is a crucial philosophical word that you
Mm-hmm.
cannot simply throw around.
Mm.
You can't. I mean, Hegel struggled to clarify what is
Mm.
means, but another thing would be the notion of everything, which is absolutizing. It's reductionist. Again, so as I've said, it's
Mm-hmm.
lazy thinking. So what did Carolyn
Mm-hmm.
something said?
I can't even pronounce it right. You know, it's uh, Carol Hainish. Hainish is that?
Hainish.
I suppose
Or,
that's the title is the personal is political, and of course
mm,
she writes this in the context of how they talk about personal experiences of women in
mm,
the civil society
mm,
amongst other activist groups, and normally she reacted to how it's normally being dismissed because it thought of it as therapy sessions.
mm,
And the weird thing is that I think her argument is precisely the reason why they experience such hardships in their personal lives, like for example, being abused by their spouses
mm,
or being unable um, to get proper medical care for certain
mm,
processes specific to women,
mm,
medicine specific to women,
mm,
that is tied to how women were treated by society at large. So
mm,
there is a clear there for in that sense that there is a clear connection to the
yeah.
political and the personal. When I think in particular the reason why they beat this to the tune of this drum,
Mm,
mostly the people who do are LGBT,
mm,
minorities, indigenous
mm,
peoples, women. They're more sensitive that if they belong to a category that
mm,
has been made minority and disenfranchised.
mm,
So, but at the same time, it makes it difficult for
mm,
like everyone else at large to actually understand it.
yeah.
Like what you're not like a subject of this
Mm,
kind of uh,
repression.
subalternization, oppression, etc. So of course I mean, that's one thing. That's one thing that I have difficulty with. Of course, they have been
Mm,
subject to political oppression just by their, like, depending on people who they love, or
mm,
depending on their genitalia or or their lack thereof or whatever.
mm,
So
mm.
yeah, uh,
Yeah,
so
the
yeah,
thing is, I think, well, based on, I think I've read that article,
right,
and it is a rhetorical mechanism.
mm,
It is one way to convince people of
mm-hmm.
the imperative to
Yeah,
struggle against such political oppression.
right,
And I think for our listeners, and I think that something to sum up our arguments, though we're
mm,
not yet ending here, we
mm,
must not confuse a rhetorical statement with a statement of fact.
mm,
The fact is, everything is not political.
right,
The fact is, everything can be politicized. That is
mm-hmm.
the fact.
Yeah, right,
So the dictum is not factual, it is
mm-hmm.
rhetorical. We value it as a rhetorical mechanism, but nothing
Right.
more, nothing less.
If I may
Mm.
try to reframe what you said, so
Yeah, yeah,
not, I mean, technically, politics can be found everywhere. I think what we can say that,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
not it's not automatically political. Like I would refer
Mm.
it to the I suppose certain types of like air
Mm.
molecules, like technically carbon dioxide is
Mm.
technically everywhere, but it
Mm.
takes a match to make it fire. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that. So in other words, it needs to be a chemical reaction before it
mm.
becomes something else.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah.
like technically, Or water, for example.
Mm.
Water is everywhere, but in order for you to turn it into something else, you need a conduit.
Siyempre
Like
laging
some.
umuulan.
Oh
Yeah, water's
yeah,
everywhere.
yeah. Water's everywhere. No, but literally, water is in everywhere. Everything else, even like, uh, even our books absorb
Mm.
moisture. Like there's moisture everywhere. There's water
Right, I
everywhere.
need to buy some dehumidifiers.
So yeah, I mean another thing that bothers me actually,
Mm.
the reason why this topic bothers me is technically it has something to do with our profession or our vocation. I
Mm.
mean technically, if everything's political, then technically you and I can comment on everything, and yet we're
No,
not exactly.
no,
Yeah,
we're not. We're not.
we're,
We're not. You know,
exactly.
regarding
Yeah.
that one,
Mm-hmm.
since it is part of our profession, and
Mm-hmm.
yes, you're right. The political can be found everywhere, and I think that's a more
Mm-hmm.
acceptable term because
Mm-hmm.
it highlights that everything has a political dimension, but that's
Mm-hmm.
only one dimension. You cannot reduce something to that dimension. For
Right.
example, if I take a shit, when is me taking a shit political?
Right.
When is me taking a shit
Uh,
political? Is it me reading a political book while pooping? Is it my act of pooping itself, or is it
or if
where
you're
my poop
taking a
goes?
shit in your neighbor's house, you know.
Yeah, or taking a shit in my neighbor's house, or probably with public drainage. So that's already a
Yeah.
dimension of me shitting that is public. How to
Ah.
dispose of the shit.
Mm-hmm.
So again, everything has a political dimension, but not everything is
Mm-hmm.
political. So you
Mm-hmm.
cannot reduce something to that.
Mm-hmm.
So fuck Shizak. Regarding to health both.
Whoa, okay. Actually, another way to put it is technically, as long as we are human, I mean, the fact is, you and I
Mm,
both agree that man is a political animal, and as long as anything is created and done by man, there's always something political in it,
mm,
technically. But how much of it has to be political for us to call it political? Like, same
mm,
for instance, technically there's milk in many kinds of cake. Do we call it milk cake or something?
mm. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So yeah, you have answered that question. Like,
No,
how
yeah.
much does it happen to
How
be?
much?
How much politics does it have to be in order to be called properly political?
That I think is dependent on the object itself. We cannot determine
Mm-hmm.
it. We cannot determine. It depends on the object itself. How much of it is does actually affects public affairs or affects
Mm-hmm.
everyone else. For example,
Mm-hmm.
shitting again, pooping. How much of it is political? It's only political, probably in terms of public drainage. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Or for Trump's case, probably when he's tweeting. So
Nah,
pooping and tweeting
yeah.
is part and parcel. But again, it depends on the object. It depends on the
Mm-hmm.
object. And I
Mm-hmm.
think we can go to art. How much of an art is political?
Mm.
I think that
Well,
is.
I've actually argued with
Mm.
multiple artists over the past few. When I
Yun
keep
nga,
finding them,
away.
no, but they basically an artist. Technically, number one has is
Mm,
not a solid. They argue, and to an extent, I agree. Is that art is not a solitary venture? Although, to be honest, it can still be. But for them, they are in a way social artists. They have a
mm,
social role. Artists
mm,
have a social role, and it's their responsibility, according to them, to at least reflect and serve the interests of an audience, whoever that may be, and that audience can be the public.
mm,
And I think, to a certain extent, if if they address a public wide enough and talk about political issues directly, of course, that's great. That is art as political, definitely.
mm.
But even like, I mean, that this brings to another question: like, which are all forms of art political, or what about like a Jackson Pollock painting, or
Yeah,
like the
an
Mona
abstract,
Lisa? Is
yeah.
Mona Lisa
or
like political?
or is
I
it
mean,
an
it's just a
abstract painting?
woman,
A
an abstract
thoroughly abstract
painting.
painting, can it be again, it depends on the object itself. And again, my case against this idea of everything is political is
Mm-hmm.
absolutizing and reductionist logic
Mm-hmm.
behind it. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm against. uh,
Mm-hmm.
can the Mona Lisa be political? I think there's a political dimension to the Mona Lisa, first and foremost. Um, well, one example would be, I think it would be Leonardo's reaction to the system of patronage, because you only
Mm-hmm.
paint when there's a patron. And the
Right.
Mona Lisa, I think, was one of the few works that he had that was not commissioned, because he
Right.
carried it around with him. He carried it. No one.
Actually,
He didn't
yeah.
give it to a patron, so he carried it around
Uh-huh.
with him the rest of
Ah,
his life. So
actually,
that's his act of rebellion.
I think the well, I've read somewhere that
Mm,
the significance of the Mona Lisa is not at all even social, and
mm.
not even sexual. Some people say that it's him being a transvestite. Like, well, he's homosexual, but
Mm.
I mean, I don't
He,
think that's
he
it.
he found a woman
Acco-
that looks like him, and eventually he tried to modify to look it.
No, but actually, apparently, it was a combination of his techniques of how
Mm,
he, for example, how he tried to make depth, or
mm,
like talked about how making, like, for example, cloth and fabric look
mm,
more like fabric, how to paint fabric, how to paint water, for example. So it's a combination of all the techniques that he
mm,
accumulated throughout his career.
right,
It does not at all has to do with the image itself, but really
mm,
how, or like, why does it paint a woman? It doesn't matter. It's
mm,
more about how we produce that image,
mm.
you know.
And the
So it's more like
smile.
that.
The smile
Yeah.
was a first to an extent.
Hmm.
Women are not really allowed to smile in paintings
Hmm.
during his time, so
Yeah.
that was the first time
Actually,
it's me.
yeah. I think this is one the point where we can move on to this other topic, which is more or less even your quote unquote personal opinions are. Most people call
Mm.
it your politics. Like your opinions are your politics. And do you ever experience that? You know, like iba yung politika niya, mga ganyan, politika.
I paid a high price for having my politics really. But are my opinions
Mm.
political? Well, if it concerns public matters, then yes, it is
Mm-hmm.
political.
Right.
Well,
But some.
even if someone's, that's a great contradiction. If someone
Mhm.
proclaims himself as apolitical, he's making a political statement.
Yeah,
that's
everyone.
why that's why being apolitical is a joke.
Mm, I mean, mm, that is actually the argument they always put. That even if someone claims to
Mm.
be like not political, I mean, when you say everything's political, it's usually a reaction to someone saying, "Oh, stop making it political." Like the same
Yeah,
way
yeah,
in some sports,
yeah, yeah,
like
yeah,
how
yeah,
some football players kneel on the
yeah,
national
yeah.
anthem instead of standing, or even in Black Lives Matter in the
Mm.
NBA. So
Yeah,
most
yeah,
people
yeah.
are turned off by that.
Yeah.
So
So yeah,
sure, I
I
mean,
think
can
again, it's a knee jerk reaction. That's why
right.
that's why I call it lazy thinking, because it's a knee jerk
Mm-hmm.
reaction. Because if it is a reaction to claims of being apolitical or to stop
Mm-hmm.
people from politicizing something, then
Mm-hmm.
it is in essence an issue of politicization. And
Mm-hmm.
it takes more brain cells, it takes more focus to try to look at how something can be politicized or depoliticized. That's our
Uh-huh.
job as political scientists, and I think that should be the job of everyone else,
Uh,
to look at how the process of politicization works instead of simply resting on everything is
mm-hmm.
political.
Right.
So yeah.
I mean, I one time had this conversation. You
Mm,
know, we're discussing like a director, and that even if the like the content of the story was not political, that they're expressing their politics through, like, say, the way that they write a certain character,
mm,
or the way that, like, for instance, the way that he writes a male writes women or even lesbians, like blue is the warmest color. So that's an expression of politics because it's how they view women. I mean, it's that's the point. Like when personal becomes, it's, well, again, it's their personal conception of what a woman is in society and as a protagonist. So is that how? In what sense is that political?
well, ask the director if he meant it as a political. That's a basic question.
Yeah.
Why try to speculate over it? Ask the director
Mm-hmm.
if it's actually political. If it is, then it is a political
Mm-hmm.
statement. If the
Mm-hmm.
director says no, then no.
Yeah.
Again, it is based on the object itself, and since it is based on the object itself, it's based
Mm-hmm.
on the producer, the creator of
Mm-hmm.
that object,
Mm-hmm.
whether it is consciously, deliberately political. It is
Mm-hmm.
to an extent speculation to try to
Right.
extract something political out of something that is not meant to be
Mm-hmm.
political by the author, which
Right.
is
Right.
then again, that's a bread and butter of literary criticism, trying to extract things that are not there.
Yeah. I mean, in some sense, you know, they are projecting their own politics
Yeah.
and claiming that it's the author's politics, and like, especially when I kind of fear. I used to be completely into it, like the political
Mm,
reading of certain texts or certain
mm,
works of art, and I'm like into the point where I'm like saying, at what point am I just extracting whatever I want, like reading into it rather
mm,
than reading it per se,
mm.
you know? So
I,
it's that's the line that we have to
yeah, I think if
discern.
a political reading of a certain piece of work or art,
Mm-hmm.
I think the best thing that can be done is to see its implications in public life
Mm-hmm.
rather than attribute something political to it
Mm-hmm.
or something essentially political to it. I think that's the
Right.
safest way to do it. So for example, if you have a film that
Mm-hmm.
struck the public in such a manner that it creates an uproar,
Right.
like the Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky,
Oh.
was that essentially political? No, but it had political implications. It had public implication, but
Right.
it's not essentially political. It's just Stravinsky being an experimenter, an egotistic motherfucker. But then again, he's a genius, nevertheless. So
Uh-huh.
yeah,
So in other words, can like at what point can we call something political? Is it as a cause of political events,
yeah.
or by its? I mean, even though it wasn't political by intention,
Hmm.
is that it? Like, is it teleological, like with a political intention, or
Hmm.
it does not have an intention, but it created a political
Yeah.
effects? So
If
can we
it
call it political then?
if
Huh?
it created political effects, then yeah, the analysis can stay within that realm.
Mm-hmm.
But to say that there's something essentially
Uh-huh.
political in it, or to speculate that the author, the creator, made it deliberately political, then that is something else.
Right. But essentially, like whether it be from this level or that level,
Hmm.
doesn't that isn't it easier just to say like oh in that case it's all political, like no matter I mean
No,
because
again,
yeah.
look at what we're doing right now. We
Mm-hmm.
are dissecting things, and this is
Mm-hmm.
something. This is a process that you cannot get by hanging on to a dictum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's more of the thought process that I am that I am
Mm-hmm.
concerned with. Because if you're
Right.
resting with a dictum, you're putting on lenses
Right.
that need not be applied to everything, and
Mm.
you will not find nuances that you can only see if you remove those lenses.
Mm-hmm.
The Mona Lisa,
Mm-hmm.
Mona Lisa to an extent. Hmm.
Mm. Now,
Mona,
at this
yeah,
point I'm
yeah.
curious of what you'd say would be what is the strongest argument supporting that statement everything is political, like steel man it. When you say steel man, it's the opposite of straw manning,
Hmm.
wherein you just put a fake
Hmm.
idea of the argument. So we have to steel man, strengthen it. So in what way can we strengthen it?
No, I don't think
No.
there are multiple arguments to say that it is false.
Hmm.
One would be Ortega Gazette in
Uh-huh.
his description of modern art.
Hmm.
He said that modern art is not supposed to be a reflection of reality. It's supposed to be
Hmm.
an aggrandizement of reality. It's supposed to lift people out of the reality that they're in.
Hmm.
And also romantic art is an appeal to emotions that are not again necessarily political.
Hmm.
So there are more arguments against it, really. And
Mm-hmm.
whatever argument that they place to support it,
Mm-hmm.
it would just reflect one dimension of an object. Because again, you cannot
Mm-hmm.
reduce an object to its political dimension. You just can't.
Mm-hmm.
And if you try to reduce it, hence you have totalitarians and autocrats.
Mm-hmm. In other words, this might just be like the work of activists and artists trying to recruit people to their side. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and in a way, it's almost well. That's the scary part. Like, at what point does political art, become propaganda when you only have a one-dimensional message? 'Cause that's why I kind of uh, it's a sticky message for me. I love politics and I love art, and when you mix politics and art, it becomes immediately dangerous, and it's not. I don't necessarily like it
Mm,
automatically. Good political art tends to be still
mm,
multidimensional and still
mm.
rich, but when it has only one message to say, it's
Yeah, it becomes
you know
propaganda.
it, yeah, it's propaganda. I mean,
Yeah.
even like the Museum of Propaganda of good propaganda art is still multidimensional. You
Mm.
remember that one with China in Shanghai, where there's this picture or painting of a Chinese man and a Russian man,
Oh
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
okay,
Eh,
sure, it's Russian and Chinese friendship, but the other side of it is it's homoerotic. Like they look like a married couple, an
eh.
interracial gay married couple.
With their
So
children,
it's
they have
like,
children.
and they have children. So yeah, that's the
That's re-
multidimensionality
I
of
think that's overreading. In hermeneutics, in interpreting classics, there's
yeah.
such a term as what we call tortured reading, and I
Mm-hmm.
think uh, interpreters of art must be aware of such a thing, that
Mm.
there can be a tortured reading of something.
Mm-hmm.
But regarding your question, how can you balance it out? I think again, I agree. I agree with you that when you try to combine politics and art, it is good if it is multidimensional. But
Mm-hmm.
to simplify it, good political art is a mirror
Mm-hmm.
that the artist provides to the public. It is
Mm-hmm.
not a message, because if it is a message, it is propaganda. It is a
Mm-hmm.
mirror. a multidimensional mirror. To look at it is to see multiple aspects of reality that haven't been seen before, or you need to remind the public that it exists. So, but if it conveys one single message, deliberately or not, then that is propaganda.
All right. You know, I think based on like the Tumindig movement, you know, I saw someplace like they said that art is not a mirror, it's a sword or something, or it's a tool or something. It's like, what do you think about that? Like, have you seen that meme or that quote?
No, I haven't seen that one, but I've seen it. I've seen it. I just pushed it back in the back of my head, which is
Okay.
basically because it's a bad joke. If art is a sword, it's not art, it's propaganda. They should call Joseph Goebbels for advice.
I mean, to be fair, I mean, even propaganda can be art, but mediocre art, to be honest. Like, it can look good, it can inspire other interpretations. Like when you said, like, I mean, again, it could be a tortured reading, but we can still have fun with it to this day. You know, you have like propaganda museums and all that, but you know, again, it's not as rich as art. You know, as full-fledged works of art. You know,
should we take art against propaganda? Is propaganda still a form of art? Probably yes. We agreed with that.
Yeah.
Propaganda is
mediocre art, but art nonetheless.
I would not call it mediocre. I mean, Jesus, Leni Riefenstahl's films on Hitler were really nice in cinematography. As far as I'm concerned, it's really good. But no, I think what we can say is that they should not reduce all art into politics. They should not reduce art and they should not say that all art is political. They should just be honest and say that they are peddling propaganda.
Ooh.
It is because they're dishonest. That's why they would rather generalize. I remember that. I remember I've been watching Agatha Christie's Poirot, the ABC Murders. ABC Murders. Serial killer. He conducts a serial killing to hide just one killing. So that's basically just dishonesty as a form of murder. So all the other killings have no connections other than it being alphabetical. The only significant killing was only one. So I think the reverse side of it is calling everything political when in fact you're just peddling propaganda.
So it's like it's like eating the whole pizza to hide the fact that you ate the first slice.
Yeah, basically that.
Oh god, that's what I used to do actually. Oh no, I left all this pizza. Might as well eat everything. And say it never came.
Di po dumating yung pizza. Tinuluyan pala.
Tinuluyan. Well, I suppose. I mean, the thing about what was I gonna say? Well, I mean, this wasn't supposed to talk about art because everything is political, and then art can be this distinct conversation actually, in case. But I want to go back to everything is political, and technically, we said everything can be political, but there's another argument that perhaps the thing that people are peddling, you know, activists and artists are peddling, perhaps you can maybe say everything should be political, and therefore, you know, like you devote all your time, even both your public and your private, thinking about political ends and political goals and political victories.
Yeah,
that's what cadres are. That's what people in the MPA do. Like they devote all of their time and resources towards a political victory. And maybe that's what they're actually trying to say.
And they should say it. They should say it instead of peddling such ill-thought-out, lazy dictums.
Right. But what is number one, what is the danger of saying everything should be political? You know, and the other thing is, technically, the limits of the political and boundaries. Like, what is that? Okay, let's start with the first one.
The dangers of it is always with the question of power. Who has power? If everything is political, who has power in it? And power would always be, to an extent, unequally distributed. Mitchell's iron loaf oligarchy is always like that. So I think that's the question. That's the crux of the matter. If you want to politicize, if you want to politicize everything, the next question is who is power? Who has power? Who has the power
Right.
to determine what is right and what is wrong? That's what
Technically,
totalitarianism is.
what about everybody? Since everything is political, technically everybody, right?
If everybody has power, there would always be mechanisms to sort varying opinions out. Hence, you have rule of majority. So even a democracy that gives power to the people institutionalizes the rule of majority because the majority should have the decisive power. Then it can go back again to the cycle. Minorities can complain if the majorities will fail, and the voting will start again. But the majority is the one with power in a democracy. So yeah, power is always concentrated at the hands of a section of a society. That section can be large. That section can be fluid. That section can be broad. But power will still be concentrated,
Yeah.
and you need to exclude people.
Well, is that the point then? I mean, most of, again, artists and activists tend to say like to democratize power and say everyone should have a say in their own and in their life and public life. If that's the case, then what?
Then they should just say that one instead of
Uh-huh.
falling that.
No, that is what they're saying. Everything
No.
is political, therefore we should all unite and we should all
Ugh.
act politically, like,
There will always be an elite
as
somewhere.
if there is no line between the public and the private. No, since everything is towards a political goal, that is precisely their goal. Yeah, democratizing it. Isn't that
Mm,
right? Isn't that a doesn't that make sense?
that makes sense, but it doesn't need that dictum of everything is political. Really, they can just jump. They can just go to their conclusion instead of using that as a or disguising that
No.
dictum as a statement of fact. But if they want to politicize everything, then that's classic totalitarianism for you.
Oh.
Because the private sphere would always be, well, as far as Jeffrey Green is concerned, again, I always repeat his arguments regarding the sanctity or the necessity of the private sphere. You need somewhere to rest from all the politics. And if you
Right.
deprive people of that resting place, then they would all be toxic. Because power is toxic. One way or another, it is toxic.
Okay. So
What about you? Where would you draw the line between the public and the private?
where would I draw the line? I mean, I think that's the the issue that we have today. I mean, it is difficult to draw the line because at the same, especially when the way we work today, our work, we're a relation to it's a relation to external world, and if we cannot properly make that work-life balance, even the culture of work-life balance, they've related it to the system of capitalism, and that's, I think, if they see it that way, it kind of makes sense. Even the way that we rest actually can be construed as a political statement. You know what I mean? Like, there's this emerging culture of like it's okay to take a rest. All the memes and inspirational thing, like take time off and all that, recharge, self-care. The culture of self-care is another thing.
And they also have
So
an
I think
industry of self-care.
well, exactly. So I suppose there's a counter force to that already with regards to like that. There is already a line being developed, but isn't that that struggle or that, how you say, interaction between such also a political one? Even technically, the statement that we need to rest is also a political one.
It can be politicized. It can be politicized. As of now, it is not. You leave it to the
How so?
individuals. You leave it to the individuals to try to take a rest. It can be politicized if you institute 3-day working weeks. That is something. That is how you politicize. Again, we go back to the notion of politicize. It can be politicized.
What about
Taking a rest can
just
be politicized,
yeah?
but it's not essentially political because
Why not?
you can institutionalize a 3-day work week, and you can have someone who would still work 7 days a week.
I mean, technically, what if individuals simply take a rest? Technically, I like in the same way one person takes a rest, in the same way like how Rosa Parks, for example, like a
Mm.
singular person at the very least chose to remain seated. It's when she was being told to stand up. Isn't that comparable? You know.
That's already an individual act. So
Mm-hmm. And
individual
individual acts are
individual
also political.
no individual
It's a
act
political
done in a
statement, right?
public space. It was
Mm-hmm.
public transportation, and it was against a law on segregation. So
Right.
yeah, it's an individual act in a public space for a public cause. So it's
Mm-hmm.
thoroughly political. But
Right.
again, we fall back on the idea that everything can be politicized. Everything can be
Uh-huh.
politicized.
Mm-hmm.
Even that's the other side of. I think one of the sources of this everything is political idea is Althusser's notion of ideology underlying
Right.
all aspects of life.
Mm-hmm.
Underlying, yes,
Mm-hmm.
but you cannot reduce everything to that.
Mm-hmm.
So you have Henri Lefebvre arguing that
Henri
even
Lefebvre.
if the everyday life is covered with politics and capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
he argues that there will always be a kernel of freedom that
Mm-hmm.
cannot be touched by the state. And from that kernel, you have
Mm-hmm.
activities of resistance
Mm.
to capitalists' everyday life. Even Henri Lefebvre would argue for that. But then again,
Well,
Henri Lefebvre was fired from the Communist Party of France. So
uh, okay. I mean, again, it's that interaction with the state. You say resistance. You know, it's
Mm.
always in relation to the state. So even then, resistance is political. And it's even Zizek saying that doing nothing can be the most violent thing at all. And that in even doing nothing and remaining in, I mean, that's the thing. Even when you choose not to manifest yourself in the public sphere, you know,
Mm.
staying home, not saying anything, not doing anything, that has an effect on the political sphere, right?
yay,
Your absence
non-voting.
is, yeah, or not doing anything. And now, if everyone, yeah, the fact of even not participating is a political
Mm.
statement. Isn't that? Doesn't that mean that even your non-action and absence is also political?
It can be politicized.
Hmm.
It can be
What is the
politicized, but
difference?
not necessarily.
Yeah, what's the difference between not is
If someone
politicized
stays
and?
at home because he's lazy,
Mm-hmm.
is that political? It's
Hmm.
not. It's just being lazy. Simple as that.
So so if
He's an idiot, basically staying in
wait,
the private sphere.
so just because something has political effects doesn't mean make it political. In other words, like politicization. When you say something's
Mm.
politicized, it's with again. Is that with the intention and perception,
Okay,
or
regarding if it
yeah,
has political effects,
right?
if one person stays at home or if a minority stays at home instead of voting, does it have any political effect? No, not now, because it hasn't
Mm-hmm.
reached a certain critical mass.
Mm-hmm.
Staying at home, not participating in voting, is a problem in the United States because for the longest time it had reached a critical mass, meaning 49% of people don't vote. So that's a critical
Mm-hmm.
mass. So there's an issue of threshold. There's
Mm-hmm.
an issue of threshold. Now it varies from case to case.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, then again, if the majority doesn't vote, then that already politicized the notion of non-voting. Or
Mm-hmm.
if, as I have advocated,
Mm-hmm.
principled non-voting, meaning we don't vote because we have public demands,
Mm-hmm.
then that is also politicizing it. So
Mm-hmm.
it can be politicized, but not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. No,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily. If minority sits at home, doesn't care about shit, then the Greeks have the term idiotes, someone who is thoroughly consumed by the private sphere.
Mm, yeah. Mm. Here, that's another thing.
Hmm.
The reason why we have a private sphere in the first place, technically, is because of, and it's guaranteed by,
Hmm.
the political, the
Hmm.
political laws and social contract, whatever, guarantee that we have private property, homes, you know, private space. So technically, isn't the existence of the private space also political?
A frame.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a frame, but what goes in it,
Mm-hmm.
is it political?
Mm.
It is framed by politics. Framed. That's the proper term, framed.
Okay.
If it affects the internal doings in the household, then that is something else. That is politicization,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily. Again, if I shit,
Mm.
If I walk around naked in my house, is it political? No. It's just me
It's a
walking around naked in my
rebellion
house.
against clothing.
No, it's just me walking around because I'm too lazy to wear clothes. So yeah,
Okay.
it frames. So regarding
Mhm.
regarding private sphere and its
Mhm.
relationship with the public, it frames, but it doesn't necessarily determine what goes inside it.
All right. So let me just to make it clear. All
Mm,
right. What is the difference between quote unquote being political and
mm.
being politicized? That's what you've been saying over and over.
Okay, being political is the effect of being politicized. Politicization is a process.
Mm-hmm.
It is a process, and as a process, it is not certain,
Mm-hmm.
nor is it absolutely sustainable, nor is it something that you can generalize.
Mm-hmm.
You must look at it as a process, something that moves, something that
Mm-hmm.
fluctuates, something that can be
Mm-hmm.
political now, can be depoliticized the next day, it can be repoliticized the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a process, an ongoing process, and uncertainty. And that's another thing. That's another thing that I hate about this dictum of
Mm-hmm.
everything is political. This sense of arrogant certainty that
Mm-hmm.
I abhor in every human
Mm-hmm.
being with the capacity to think.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, to look at the
Mm-hmm.
process of depoliticization is to take into account uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be humble to take into account the uncertainty that something need not be political, can be
Mm-hmm.
politicized, but
Mm-hmm.
need not be political.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, I'm thinking of an example wherein something that was political became depoliticized. Mm,
Technically,
coffee houses.
coffee.
If
Co-
Starbucks existed during the 18th century in France,
mm,
it would have been the hotbed of political discussions. But
mm-hmm.
now Starbucks is where you get pumpkin spice. If Starbucks existed in Egypt back in the 16th century,
Right.
it would have been banned
Mm-hmm.
because there was a brief ban on coffee
Mm.
because it makes people think
Mm.
straight and follow up on
Uh,
their things. So,
mm.
so yeah, coffee houses was a political institution.
Mm-hmm.
Benjamin Franklin hung out in a in a coffee shop.
Mm.
That's where political thinking occurred. But now, not necessarily. So that's one
Mm-hmm.
political object that had been depoliticized and can be
Right.
repoliticized, but
Mm-hmm.
now it is depoliticized.
Right. Hmm. I'm not sure if this is still a logical
Mm,
question, but technically, okay. So, in theory, can we
mm.
say that since everything can be politicized, technically through the process of politicization, everything can be political, correct?
Everything can be.
Simultaneously. Yeah.
Everything can be political.
Now, I suppose there's this. So, of course, we mentioned some of the dangers of that happening.
Mm,
But so the position that not everything should be politicized
mm.
needs to be defended. So perhaps, what do you think about that? And what is the right balance between the political and non-political? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's. I think we discussed it in one of our episodes regarding political neutrality. Neutrality is to an extent the defense of that sphere
Yeah.
wherein we are relatively isolated from the public so that we can look at it
Mm.
from a relatively objective perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And regarding that, as I said earlier on, the careful use of the word is. So we move
Mm-hmm.
now to can be.
Mm-hmm.
So can be acknowledges process, the
Mm-hmm.
reality of process, and the reality of
Mm-hmm.
uncertainty. So it
Mm-hmm.
can be. It
Mm-hmm.
can be, but it is not is. It is not an
Mm-hmm.
is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Semantics.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
It's I inherited that one from hermeneutics, careful use of words. That's why I overcorrect myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Let's see.
Mm.
I I'm trying to think of. I've lost my last question.
No,
I
your
lost my
last
last
question.
question.
Your last question
Mm.
is about how can we strike a balance between the private and the public. So your turn.
Ah. Mm. Mm.
Mm. Mm.
Actually, well, I was gonna say one more thing,
Mm.
and that thing isn't gonna. Did we? I'm not sure if we answered this last time, but
Mm.
maybe we can answer this now. What if to be neutral or to be
Mm.
to be non-political is actually a mode of privilege? That's the thing. Like, in other words, there are some people who do not have a choice but to be
Mm.
political,
Mm.
because to be political, quote unquote, is guarantees their survival. What
Mm.
about minorities, poor people, LGBT, women? That's why they're pushing for this in the first place. What
Mm.
if it's because you do not feel,
Mm.
you and I do not feel that kind of
Mm.
urgency to be political, so we
Mm.
choose not to be. So, what do you think about that? Because that's, for me. I mean, I can say that, but that's been bothering me. I mean, I
Mm.
don't necessarily agree with it, but I
Mm.
don't have a direct response to it. Like, what if
Mm.
maybe we don't? It's not a necessity for us to be political. Therefore, we can
Mm.
afford to be
Mm.
non-political, and we to exit the political sphere. So, what do you think?
Yeah, so what? So what if it's a privilege? It should be enjoyed by everyone.
Mm.
Okay, because again, I understand privileges based on the existence of burdens. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and I tie it with the notion of rights and responsibilities. So privileges and burdens,
Mm-hmm.
rights and responsibilities go hand in hand. I say that the privilege to exit politics should be available for all, because everyone needs a rest. Who should
Mm-hmm.
carry the burden of being political 24/7? Politicians.
Mm-hmm.
Being a politician should be a burden, not a privilege.
Mm.
Being a public servant is a burden for many,
Mm-hmm.
but there are those who can escape it
Mm-hmm.
because they're fucking bastards. But
Mm.
all politicians must carry it as a burden,
Mm-hmm.
so that the privilege of people to leave, more or less, to have
Mm-hmm.
the privilege of leaving politics can be available for more
Mm-hmm.
people. Now, rights and responsibilities would ensure that those with the privilege to leave politics will have the responsibility to return to politics
Mm.
when it is necessary and when they can.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that's a more complicated picture. But the crux of the matter is being political is a burden.
Mm.
It is a burden that must be carried. It is not a privilege to be political. It doesn't put you high in society. You are the carrier of
No, no.
society. You're basically in the mud.
It is. Wait, it's. I mean, what I'm saying is, to be non-political, to be neutral, is
Yeah.
precisely a privilege.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it should be available for many people.
Uh-huh.
Available for
So if
all.
it's, so if that no longer makes it a privilege, then doesn't it? It should
Not
be a
necessarily.
right.
No,
It's a right.
it is still a privilege because the burden would still be carried by some.
Mm. That's
See?
interesting, actually. So, in other words, before you become a politician, you have to know that ideally they should be aware that it is a sacrifice and a burden.
Mm.
Even their tweets are politically relevant.
Yeah.
Unlike,
Yeah.
yeah.
Their private lives disappear. That is the burden that they must carry. Their private lives disappear. And I think they're carrying it, those who are political. Now, those who are forced to be political because they have no choice,
Mm-hmm.
the repressed,
Mm-hmm.
those who are oppressed by society, they have no choice to be political. That, to an extent, is also a rhetorical mechanism, because even the oppressed can be inactive in politics.
All right.
Even the oppressed can say, I would rather cope with my life rather than participate in politics.
Mm-hmm.
So it is also a rhetorical mechanism.
Mm.
It is a rhetorical mechanism to say that they are forced to be political. The fact is they're not. And many have chosen to stay silent and just cope.
Mm.
I have data for that one. So to those
Yeah.
who are listening, bite me.
Actually, one thing I want to say, I think it's one of the last things I want to say,
Mm.
actually, because I think we've covered a lot of ground, was that the rhetorical mechanism, as you said, or the dictum of everything is political, kinda forces people, like activists that use this, force people to a position saying you're with us or against us. In other words, you have no choice but to be political. You either side with the oppressor or not. But the thing is, we go back to Arendt, who defines politics as freedom. In other words, the first dictum declares that you have no choice but to be political, therefore you have to pick sides. That's no way to be political. That's no way to be political. In other words, it is a choice and it is essential, but you always have a choice. You have the choice to, and it's essential for you to know the risks and to know when you're entering and exiting the political sphere. in order for you to make it a choice. Because if it's everywhere, then you literally have no choice. If it's like the Matrix,
Yeah.
but
That's
so yeah,
totalitarianism for you.
right,
The
right,
destruction of choices.
yeah.
Yeah.
So another, if you really want politics to be a freedom, let people choose either not to make a choice or allow them not to make a choice. That's still freedom.
But that's liberal. They're Stalinists.
Yeah.
Oh God. Anyway,
Okay.
I have much beef with the left, especially
Mm,
with this. They're mangling what politics is, and ordinary Filipinos have their own notion of what politics is.
what is that?
I'm about to find out. about to
And
find
on
out.
that note, well, okay, this is an impromptu discussion actually. So hope people find some people find this useful. Yeah, at least personally, I found this very helpful. So thank you, Borch, for that. At least indulging me in this personal question.
Ay mo
So at least, yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, freedom at the end of the day, freedom should be the basis of politics, not the lack thereof. I think that it stems from that thing where everywhere he is in chains. That's from Rousseau, right? Everywhere he is
Yeah.
in chains.
Yeah.
There. So it's today's activists stem from Rousseau. But at least point, we have to perceive politics as an act of freedom, where you can enter and exit. All right, and when you enter, you have to be fully prepared through the process of thought and reflection, which can only
Sense
happen in the private sphere. So yeah.
sense of duty to enter.
That's true. That's true. I mean, duty might be a different word for it. I mean, because, duty is normally imposed, actually.
Yeah,
Um,
that is something agreed upon by society. Hence, we
mhm,
shift the question to how this society is designed.
mhm. I suppose it could also be something like out of conscience, maybe, or like an ethical
Mm,
responsibility. But that's different from duty. Duty tends to be socially
yeah,
instilled.
political education is there to
Mhm,
align
right.
mores with
Mhm.
duty.
Yeah. All right. So, how do we end this? So, thank you for the episode 1 of VI Raw or VI Unedited. Oh yeah. So,
uh,
remember to find us on Anchor, Spotify, YouTube, or send us if you want to do another Raw that is unscripted and unoutlined. Send us at pipodcastph@gmail.com. But until the next PI Raw.
magandang gabi, mga kapiay.